Welcome to A Really Good Sex Chat, a podcast aiming to open up conversations about disability and sexuality. I'm your host, Candice Care-Unger, psychosexual therapist and specialist social worker at Care Rehab. Join us as we have frank conversations about sexuality, disability, fertility, pleasure, dating, and everything in between. This podcast is brought to you by Care Rehab and recorded on Darug land. In this episode of A Really Good Sex Chat, we're talking with Mel Harrison. Mel Harrison is a person with a disability who uses a wheelchair and wears hearing aids. Mel is a consultant in disability, diversity and inclusion and a long-time advocate for people with disability. Today we're talking about the work that Mel does in providing sexuality education and helping educate folks about safe and respectful relationships, empowering people to explore dating and creating environments for people to find connection. Mel's passion is in breaking down barriers for people with disability around work, education, relationships, and recreational activities, trying to make people across the nation understand that you never know someone's ability unless you give them a chance. Let's jump into the chat. Good morning, Mel. So great to see you. How are you going?
Very well, thank you. How are you?
Good. I'm so excited to have this chat with you because we circle each other professionally and very rarely get the chance to actually come together to chat about our work and what we're both doing in this space. So I feel like today is a bit of an opportunity for me to be catching up on what you've been doing as well. So to just kick us off, maybe if you don't mind, you could just introduce yourself to our podcast audience and give everyone a bit of an idea about who you are and what you've been doing.
Thanks for that. So, my name is Mel Harrison, and I have a business called Sitting Low, Reaching High. Essentially, I've worked in the disability space for the last 25 years. I've also had a disability my whole life, but I'm really passionate about the rights of people with disability, in particularly when it comes to violence prevention. And I guess we'll talk about that a lot through this episode. But I've worked with thousands of people with disability, including intellectual disability, over time, about what their rights are. And the way that I like to do that is essentially through advocacy or training or developing different policies that are out there to assist people with disability just to know what their rights are. Because from my understanding of the work that I've done over the last 25 years, a lot of people with disability don't actually know what their basic rights are. And often that comes from people telling them what they are able to have or not able to have and not understanding what they actually are entitled to.
So your role is very much as an educator by the sounds of it, as well as a advocate and an activist.
And a lot of it's around like the whole social and sexual safety. Like there's not a lot of places that are focusing on social safety. And social safety needs to come as part of sexual safety as well, to ensure that people are actually just safe where they are.
What do you mean by that?
Home, out in the community. Part of one of the projects that I worked with, which is Safer Girls, Safer Women with Sexual Health Family Planning, ACT, and it was a national project, and it still is because I'm still on it. And we're really looking at like women and girls with disability and gender diverse people with disability around what they actually think safety means to them. And often when we interview people with disability and you talk about safety, the response will be things like, oh, putting your seatbelt on in the car, like when you're traveling, or, like making sure you know when to cross the road, and things like being safe where you can actually talk or you can speak up or you can actually expect someone to listen to you when you're asking for something. You're able to be included. You're able to feel like you can just be, able just to have a voice out there is not something that a lot of people with disability view as what safety is.
There's a socialization to that in terms of being allowed to speak up or being allowed to have a voice as well.
Well, when I think about it for myself, I just think that if I wasn't allowed a voice, then how would I make a decision? How would I know who I want to have as people coming into my home? How would I know if I, needed support work, who that would be? Or how would I even know how to actually, like, have conversations that are difficult? And also the part of being safe is just, like, being able to leave your home and being able
Mm.
to feel like you can get on the bus, or you can get on the train, or you can get into a taxi, or you can go to, like a cafe or to a pub or to whatever it is, but feel like people are going to treat you as a human primarily, rather than looking at you like you have a disability and then treating you as differently.
Okay, so the work that you've been doing in the sexual safety space, can we talk a bit about that specifically? First of all, what does that look like and how did you get into it?
So I worked for a long time for a disability organisation, and I got to meet a lot of people, particularly in boarding houses across New South Wales, and
Yep.
particularly people that had intellectual acquired brain injury and cognitive impairment. And I was asked to develop training around how to provide what their human rights are, like sex education, and what abuse and neglect might look like, and what unhealthy and healthy relationships look like. And initially, to be honest, when I developed it, I thought I might have been a little bit patronizing about how
Mhm.
I was presenting the information. But then once I started delivering it, I realized how many people with disability don't know what their basic human rights are, or don't understand
Mm.
the difference between healthy and unhealthy relationships. And that's not because they can't understand. And that's the big key that I'd really like to focus on. Because it's
Mm.
not that they can't understand, it's because people have been telling them that they can't understand, or people are telling them what they should be thinking is rather than what actually is. That was my beginning of me delivering sexuality and healthy relationships training. I went across Australia for many years delivering that, particularly with people with intellectual disability and brain injury. And just part of it is, that whole recognition that it does happen and a lot of people don't realize it happens.
I just want to go back to that theme for a second about delivering education and feeling like you're patronizing people, because I think that's something that was a bit of a learning curve as well for me, coming, into a postgraduate program, studying at a university level of, learning all about human sexuality and then applying it back to my clinical work. At times I would feel exactly what you're talking about there. Like, have I undersold it? Like, is it too simple? Because the first time I tried to deliver it, I was pitching it like it was a postgraduate program. And I was like, well, okay, I've overcooked it now. And it's like way too high level. And so being able to kind of go back to the drawing board and just think, actually, this is like all of it. We need to teach everything that we mostly teach our children as they are growing up. But if you have never had the opportunity to be taught, then there's massive knowledge gaps. It's kind of would probably fall into what we know as health literacy. But if there's been no opportunity to learn, then there's no opportunity to acquire the knowledge. So we do have to go back and cover a lot of basics. Why do you think that there's such a gap with people being able to get the information about sexual safety right from a young age?
There's a huge gap for people with disability at a young age to get sexual safety information. There's a couple factors, and I think one of them is that protection factor. So
Mm.
often, like parents or caregivers, like may feel like that their child is never going to be sexually active, so wants to
Mhm.
protect them from that area, so they don't allow them to have any of the sex education kind of conversations, because they feel like that if they do have that, then they're going to be at risk of sexual abuse. The part that I understand is that by not having the sex education does actually put people at sexual abuse, because they don't understand the difference between what an unhealthy or a healthy relationship looks like. And yeah, that doesn't mean that abuse is going to stop, but it means that at least people understand the difference between the two. And when someone's telling them that this is okay and this is normal, they'll understand it actually isn't okay because they've received that information.
Yeah, you're right, Mel, because this comes up in like, sex education justification all the time. Like, and even within, mainstream public schooling as well. Oh, if we teach people about sex, they'll go and have sex and it'll make them much higher risk. Whereas the reality is the more we teach about sex and consent, the later sexual debuts, the more decision making that goes into sexual activity and whether someone actually wants to do that, the reduced risk of STI and unwanted pregnancy. So there's loads of public health benefits to comprehensive sex education. And it kind of goes against the rhetoric that, if we teach people about sex, we'll make them more sexually active. Whereas the truth is, we teach people about sex and it is a health prevention strategy. It's a safety strategy. And so that's kind of what motivated
and
you and got you into it.
if you're talking about it, it means that people understand it and they're having conversations with people that are people they should be having conversations with. And when they refuse that information, it means they're going to go to other places. So that's where they go onto sites that they shouldn't go on to. They meet up with people they shouldn't meet up with, etc. And that's when it actually creates that danger. Regardless of whether someone has a disability or not, they are entitled to know what a healthy and unhealthy relationship looks like. And there's a lot of people with disability that will never have sex. But there's also a lot of people that don't have disability that don't have sex either. It's actually got nothing to do with disability. It's about what information's actually out there for that particular person. And often when it comes to people that have intellectual disability, the whole thing's around, we don't want them to engage in sexual practices because they might end up pregnant or they might end up with a family. And one of the things that I always sit back and I reflect on is that I know that there's hundreds of thousands of books out there that teach parents how to be parents. And I can't actually confirm this completely myself because I'm not one myself, but I'm pretty sure once that kid pops out of you and starts screaming, none of those books make a single bit of difference. What makes a difference is the support that you have around you and the network that you have around raising that child. And then up until 1992, it was legal to sterilize women with intellectual disability. And that was all about preventing them from having their monthlies, but also from getting pregnant and having a family, etc. But then that was just a band aid on how many times women with disability were assaulted. So we know that 70 to 90% of people with intellectual disability, particularly women with intellectual disability, experience sexual assault in their lifetime.
And I remember when the Australian human rights data came out, it was like 9 out of 10 women with an intellectual disability had experienced sexual assault in their lifetime. And you just think, far out, how can we accept that rate and think that that's normal? We need to assume people have a sexual assault history. We can't do good comprehensive work without asking about it, or at least, coming from a trauma-informed perspective, because the stats are so high that this is likely a part of somebody's story, and needing to understand that what impact that has in terms of how people have made sense of relationships.
I understand that we need to ask about it. I think that's extremely important, but I also think it's even more important that we can't just ask, we need to follow up. So we need
Yeah,
to
sure.
actually be there to continue that process, because that's been the issue with a lot of people with disability, that we're giving them the information, then we walk away, and then they don't know what to do with it. So I think that's a really important part, and I think that's something that needs to be focused or engaged with the whole process. That it's not just delivering a product. We need to have other people there to follow up going forward. But in terms of healthy relationship, that's really around, how do you know when someone's respecting you? How do you know when you can trust someone? How do you know when you can just feel safe? But not even how do you know? What is it that makes you know that? There's a
Yeah.
difference. And I think that's really important. Because, you might know how you know because someone's told you, but it doesn't mean you know how it feels. So you need to know how it actually feels to feel all of that. You need to know how you feel safe. You need to know how you feel respected, how you receive trust, but also how do you actually show the other person trust and respect and be part of that process as well. Like, I think that's the part that, like often like we're missing, that we're
Mm.
not asking people to understand how it actually feels and what it actually means to them. And we're asking them to tell us what it is, and then they can tell us. Like a lot of people can tell us because they've been dictated or they've been told how to explain that, but it doesn't mean they understand it. There's a lot of people that I've worked with over the years that have experienced something that they didn't like. They will tell me that they're told that it's okay, etc. So they tell everybody it's okay. But they can also tell me that they didn't feel that it was okay. But they couldn't put to words why it wasn't okay because they never was given that education. Without education, you're not afforded with that information or afforded with those words. There's so many people that have intellectual disability and they know that something's happening to them that's wrong, but they've been told that it's okay. Therefore, they don't actually say it's not okay. And therefore, the whole world thinks that, you know, that everything's okay. And when they do finally speak up, it comes to a point of people going, well, they don't know what they're talking about. Why didn't they speak up, etc.
The way I approach this is a bit more maybe somatically. Like, so how do you learn to recognize sensations in your body? And so we talk about, things that might feel good, sitting in the sun, for example. How does that feel in your body? And, start to explore a vocabulary of what feels good and how do you know that it feels good? Being able to be really specific about, the way my stomach feels or the way my chest feels or the way my skin feels. And then being able to kind of explain that. And then another example might be when we're holding like a warm cup of tea or something. It feels nice in your hand. And so you're being able to explain all the reasons why it feels nice. And then we might try something that feels yucky. I don't know, something like slime or putty or, something that's a bit texturally a bit ugh. Now tell me, what is it about this in your stomach or in your chest or in your skin that tells you that this isn't a very nice feeling? And so being able to start to have the language to come with it, being able to recognize the somatic experience, what's happening internally, to then be able to put the words to it as well. So if someone, I don't know, maybe experiences unwanted touch, how do you know that you don't want that? What's your stomach telling you? What's your chest telling you? What's your body telling you? What are your muscles telling you? And sort of being able to be very specific to be able to interpret the sensations of the body to then find the language to go with it. So that's kind of some of the ways that I might explore, learning how to interpret your sensory feedback and then find a language for it. Are there other activities that you might try?
Yeah, so one of the things I like to really do is look at the relationships map. So the
Mm.
relationships map is something that is very much like put on the ground, and there's different circles and there's different pictures depending on the group, and it really helps them understand where particular relationships are in their life and their different gestures of their life. So around that touch and that feeling, etc. But I think the other way, just taking the time to listen to the person,
Mm.
to understand as well, and not like putting words into their mouth. So it's very much
Mm.
about asking them how they feel about something and letting them explain it in their way of explaining it,
Mm.
and then being able to interpret it from that rather
Mhm.
than like just giving them suggestions, because my experience of working in the field for such a long time, a lot of people, particularly with ID, can be quite compliant. So they will just say yes
Mm.
or no to whatever they think will be the best. So I think trying to develop that rapport to understand what it is that they need for a healthy relationship and understand why that's healthy. And when we think about it in like realistic spectrum, we're all different in what we see as being healthy or what we think
Mm.
is healthy to us in a relationship, because we've all got different relationships. We all want
Yeah.
different things, but we know what the boundaries are, what healthy to unhealthy is on the spectrum. But trying to teach people with disability that when they've not been given that opportunity to understand that. But I think it's also about understanding that if people with disability do know that, how different their lives are going to be and how flourished it's going to be. And I've seen over the years where people do receive the training, they now got relationships, they now have marriages, they now have kids. They're all happy, like, but they know what's okay and what's not okay. But prior to that, they didn't know that. And so when they do the training, it's often the 2 days. It's very tailored to whatever the group needs. The training is very much around talking about what a healthy relationship looks like, what an unhealthy relationship looks like, and then putting it into sex education practice. So, in terms of what it means if someone is going to be sexually active and how to ensure that they're putting healthy relationship practices in that rather than the unhealthy relationship. And very much looking at things even to do with social media and how social media can make things a bit dangerous for a lot of people with disability, because there's a lot of people out there that I know that, on social media will target people with disability because they think they can. That isn't a healthy relationship. So really looking at different like tools and mechanisms to ensure that people understand what a healthy relationship looks like. And that really does focus with trust. It focuses with respect. It focuses with feeling safe at all times, being able to speak your mind, be able to just make decisions and have choice and control over your life. And also to acknowledge that, like all relationships, you're not always going to want to communicate with the person. And that's okay.
Yeah.
You can have those times where you don't have to communicate with that particular person. It doesn't mean you don't like them. It just means that you feel safe enough to be able to go into the next room and have a rest or go out for a walk, etc. That's all okay. Teaching people that unhealthy relationships aren't ideal on the terms of it can mean that you are unsafe. You don't have that trust. You don't have that respect.
Some of the issues I see with my clients is maybe love bombing, like they'll call and call and call and call and call and call and call. And every time that their partner or love interest doesn't answer, they'll call again. Or they'll maybe have talked on the phone and then call again like 20 minutes later. So there's a lot of issues around like impulsivity. And, when you have an interest in someone and you want to talk to them all the time, but also being able to manage a bit of self-control around how often is too often to communicate with somebody. So that's one of the biggest things that I see. What are your tips or advice? Do you cover that in your training program around respectful communication and how to manage impulsivity, even if you really do want to call that person because you really enjoy their company?
Yeah, I do talk about that, and I think that's quite important because regardless of whether it's disability or not, that
Exactly.
happens out there. But I think often that it might be happening with some people with disability is because they haven't received training around what a healthy
Mm.
relationship is. So that's one key. That's one point to it. But also part of it is really talking about just because you may want that as part of a relationship, you have to respect the other person. Respect is not just what respect is for you, it's around what respect is for the other person and jointly together. So the other person might not be okay with what you're wanting right then and there, and that's okay. The training's not about saying that the person with disability is in the right. It's about
Mhm.
training everyone to understand what respect looks like across the board and that trust looks like and the safety looks like across the board,
Mm.
because without that, there's not a healthy relationship, because you can't have a healthy relationship if it's one-sided. So it's teaching it from both sides. That can be the challenge at times,
Mm.
but I think it's really important to really emphasize on that, because I think a lot of people with disability, once they realize that they may not be particularly doing the respect side of things, they change. They want to,
Yeah.
because they actually
Yeah.
want that relationship. They want to be part of society. They want to be part of community. They want to be part of that love. And it's just the fact that no one's told them. Or,
Mm.
and that's not anything to do with them. It's because we as a society haven't afforded them with the education to understand that. So I understand, as a person with disability, that I can't be in a relationship with someone if it's all about me. Like, it's
Mm.
not going to happen. And so I understand that, but I got that education, and
Mm.
so it's not fair if someone else doesn't get that education. So I think that's the part that I'm going to always come back to, is that education is key. Like, we're all
Mhm.
about doing X, Y, and Z, but we need to ensure that everyone receives education, but not exclude it from certain people because we think they don't need it. Everybody
Mm.
needs it.
Now, you were saying before that you've had a disability lifelong, but you also acquired a spinal cord injury as a teenager. And I'm curious, in your own experience, where did you learn about sex and relationships? And was it formal or informal teaching or some other way?
For me, just a bit of a background. So I'm 43 years old. I've had a disability my whole life, but I was only diagnosed with my particular condition last November. So when I was 42 and a half years old. But
Hmm.
secondary, I have a spinal cord injury since I was 14. In terms of the sex education, I did learn that at school. I was quite
Hmm.
fortunate that I went to a mainstream school. I was one of the first people with disability to go to a mainstream school with
Yeah, right.
disability back in the day. So I was pretty fortunate there, not without a fight, mind you, because they didn't want me to go there initially. But in terms of education, I was fortunate that my friends and my family didn't exclude me from those conversations. I know how important those conversations were, even if they were difficult or embarrassing or cringeworthy,
Hmm.
as most people will actually say as you're younger. They're important because it stops you from doing things that are going to be unhealthy, but also going to resources that aren't healthy. There's so many people with disability that I know over the years that will go to porn, for example, and view that as being a healthy relationship, because that's what they see as a healthy relationship. And it's not because they really think it is, it's because that's the only information that they're receiving. They're asking for information, they're wanting to be part of information. It was like a couple of years before COVID. I was up in Queensland and delivering sexuality, healthy relationships training to a bunch of people in an ADE. And there was
Hmm.
one particular gentleman that was in there, and he was like 19 years old. It was a 2-day program, and he came for the first day. The second day, his family took him out of there because they were like, "Oh, we don't want him to know the information." But
Mm.
he was so keen to be there because he wanted to know what was okay and what wasn't okay. Because he was obviously, in my opinion, on the verge of being sexually active, and
Yeah.
was going to particular sites, etc., to find his information. And once he was speaking to us for a day, realized that that wasn't actually that healthy. And I
Yeah.
was like, well, "What are you doing?" Like, he needs to have that information.
So how do you work with families? I think this comes up in my work a lot. People are like, "Oh, how do we work with this person's family who are blocking access or this person's support workers," particularly with such a multicultural support work industry where there's a variety of different values around people with disability and also a variety of cultures around how we talk about sex and relationships. So what's your advice for working with families and formal supports?
So my advice around working with families is, and this can be, as we all know, quite tricky, always honouring the person with disability first and what they
Mm,
actually need or require in the situation. My experience, there's a lot of families that are involved and they actually view themselves as the legal caregiver, but they're actually not.
yeah.
So I think once a person with disability turns 18, we should really be listening to them in particular about what they actually need or what they want, unless they have legal guardianship over them. And that legal guardianship needs to be
But even
shown.
Mel, like guardianship doesn't extend to interpersonal relationships. Like I think that's one of the things that comes up a lot. People are like, oh, well, I'm the legal guardian, therefore I'll make this decision. It's like, well, actually, the scope of decision making doesn't exclude who someone can be friends with or who somebody might want to have an intimate relationship with. That's up to the person. They're still able to make that decision about if they'd like to spend more time with them or not.
Absolutely. I completely agree. And I think that a lot of the guardianship, it's very like distinguished between categories
Mm.
and time frames. So for example, if I had a legal guardian over me, it
Hmm.
might mean that I need help in a particular area for 3 months. It doesn't mean that they can have any control over any other part of my life at any
Mm.
point. So it's very rarely someone hasn't got the ability to be able to talk about relationship or be a part of something. And I think the huge problem that I found is the ableism and the assumptions that people have around
Mm.
disability and around what they think that that person may need or not need or can't do or not do. And I can honestly, hand on heart, say that I've met more people with cognitive impairment that have relationships where they're like married or long term partnership with kids that are better than people that I know that don't have disability. And that's because they've had to fight for it. If they're a person with disability and they've got a child, they will be more attentive to that person in general than someone that doesn't have a disability. And I don't mean that in a like a bad way. It's just the fact that they know that they have to, and that's their focus, that's their life, that's their
Mm.
part that they actually contend to. And I just think that there should be more emphasis around how do we support people to have healthy relationships? How do we support them to know or understand what consent is and how that actually means? And that consent YouTube video around a cup of tea, I think is brilliant because that really does highlight what consent looks like without it actually really focusing on the person or the person that's
Mm.
experiencing assault or like, anything going wrong. They're talking about it like having a cup of tea.
Yeah, it's a great resource.
Yeah, and I think also the other resource that I really love showing people is Brene Brown, the empathy
Mhm.
versus sympathy,
Mhm.
because I think that is something that's really important for people to watch and understand what the difference is. Because unfortunately, when a lot of people are focused with managing or working with or corresponding with anyone with disability, they go to the sympathy mode, and that's not appropriate.
Mm.
Like we need to be like more on that empathetic like mode, because if you're on more on that empathetic mode, you can actually like help people work around what a healthy relationship looks like and explore it and understand it and not do it because like you think someone is less than you, and that's the world that we're living in and we need to like move beyond.
Yeah, so we've got this absolute stereotype slash myth that if we teach people about sex and relationships, we'll make them more sexual and put them at higher risk. Whereas we actually know the truth is the more we educate people, the safer they are, the more empowered they are, the more they're able to make their own decisions. And usually we'll make much safer, informed decisions. So there's that part, like education's power, more knowledge to the people. Then we've also got, okay, working with formal and informal supports to kind of understand what's your role versus what's the person's rights. And you're kind of now crossing into the rights of the person. And then a bit of like self reflection on why are you so uncomfortable with the idea of this person being, in a relationship or exploring their sexuality. And so then kind of you turning going, well, this is actually a you problem, not a them problem. And so how can we kind of help you get your head around the fact that the person you support or you love is sexually active, and you maybe have more of a role in this than you would have if they didn't have a disability, but it's not necessarily your role to judge or to try and change, I put that in inverted commas, to make you more comfortable. So there's a few little parts here that are tracking along. We're in a massive sex positive sort of wave at the moment in terms of societal's understanding, what's okay, what's not okay. And that's included a lot of influences on social media. And there's a big gap, I think, between what people need to know and sort of where we're at in mainstream conversation, which needs to be broken down into appropriate language and skills and resourcing so people can acquire the information. So that requires some creativity on our behalf in terms of how's that we teach sex education, how's it that we teach respectful relationships that maybe looks different to other parts of education. So a lot of people that listen to the podcast are health professionals and are working in the disability space and maybe disability educators. And I'm just curious what your kind of tips to them are in terms of how do you make safe and respectful relationships education engaging, interesting, and also informative.
So the first would be the always believing the participant.
Mm-hmm.
So making sure that you believe what they're actually saying, regardless of whether the words they use are different to what you might use, because that
Mm-hmm.
might be the language that they understand or the only language that they've been taught. And to make it engaging is to ensure that you're not making it negative training.
Mm-hmm.
And what I mean by negative training is that it's got to be about how that person can use it going forward and not feel traumatized about what
Mm.
may have happened to them for the last 20 years, but more being able to use that to stop something from happening to them going forward. I think that's really important. In terms of the way it's presented, is making sure there's lots of different tools and strategies. So it's not just like me as a presenter talking to people. It's having conversations, it's getting to write things down, it's getting to draw things down, getting to act things out, etc. But
Perfect.
also ensuring that it's not done in a way that's asking people to reflect on their own lives individually, but more
Mm.
about what they see as an outside, because they're more likely to open up. They're more likely to give information. And that's where I say, like, that cup of tea consent video is good,
Mm.
because people often relate to that because they're all in that experience, but they don't want to actually acknowledge it as their own experience. So I think
Mm.
it's really important to ensure that we're not just like targeting, but also making sure that we've got mechanisms in place that will give them ongoing support after after the actual training, whether that's counseling or that's
Mm-hmm.
support work, or whether there's a mechanism that they can contact a facilitator or trainer going beyond. But I am a huge believer that, no one should deliver the training and then walk away and then there's no supports available, because things are going to come up. Like, for people, they need that support. Things come up when you deliver training to people that don't have disability. My theory is that often those people that don't have disability go home and they have a family, or they have friends, or they have other work colleagues or people in their life that they can consult with. Often if we're consulting with just people with disability, particularly if they have intellectual disability. They're not going home to that. They're going home to the people that were in that group that have intellectual disability with them, staying in a home. I'm also a strong believer of that I often don't have any of the support workers in the room when I'm
Mm.
delivering the training. And for the main reason is that so people can just be themselves. And if they don't need any support other than being able to go to the bathroom or to eat food, etc., somebody else doesn't need to be in there with them because we can support them in terms of being able to write or have those conversations. And I think that just gives people that empowering factor. My tip is always about empowering people with disability, like giving them that power back in their life, particularly if they have experienced stuff in their life that's not great. We want to give them that power and control back in their life. So doing
Yeah.
whatever we can to enable that. And sometimes part of that is just ultimately really just listening to what that person wants or needs.
Yeah. And then ensuring the support's there to follow it up, which I guess, has been my experience is a lot of the time third party insurers and funders want to fund a group thinking that's the job done, tick. Like, and this is the same in, some of the disability agencies. It's like education provided. DCJ is probably one of my biggest challenges professionally. It's like someone's about to turn 18, we need to give them sex education. Like to just send them over to me after 17 years of whatever, and they'd like in 6 sessions or in a 2-hour group or a 2-day group, just to be able to go tick, job done. And I'm often saying, well, who's the key contact support? Like, how are we going to continue to do support
Mm.
beyond this intervention? Having 1 hour with me a fortnight isn't going to change anything. It needs to be in real time advice, and consent needs to be modeled in the house. The support workers need to be inviting. Is it okay if I support you with your shower? Would you like help with your hair washing? Can I use the shampoo now? Like, it has to be modeled all the time to expect anyone else to start to return that as well. So I'm like, this is a whole culture shift within the accommodation setting or the employment setting, depending on what's happening. Whereas I think a lot of people would just like to be able to handball it over and say, quick, teach and fix. And I think it requires much more of a mobilization of the ecosystems around people to all get on board. It's time to go for a haircut. When we get to the hairdresser, is it okay if they cut your hair? How would you like your hair cut? Would you like to take a seat? Like the invitation to do all of that is very different to just, it's time for your haircut, we've cut your hair. And so I think there's lots of ways in which everyday consent can show up for people that can help facilitate all of the stuff that you're probably teaching in your workshops around respectful relationships, safety, communication. It's not just about coming to a 1-day or a 2-day workshop. It's around how do we mobilize a culture of support, a culture of safety. So I don't know what your thoughts are for the agencies out there that are maybe needing to have a bit of a change in cultural attitude. What are your thoughts?
So I guess my thoughts around the cultural changes is very much about understanding people's communication needs,
Mm.
and what tools and strategies they might need around that. I'm a strong believer that every single person with disability out there can communicate, but it's up to us to work out how their communication needs are. When we think about it on a realistic spectrum, like 87% of our communication is non-verbal anyway. So that means only 13% is verbal. So when there's people that go, "Oh, I can't communicate with someone because they're non-verbal," it's like, well, you can. So it's about working out how. And I understand that human nature is we're all awkward around silence and we all want to like fill in the spaces, etc. But I think it's really important that we all, as professionals or people that might work with disability, that we need to be okay with our awkwardness. We need to allow that space and that time for that person with disability to feel safe to be able to communicate. And also not taking over. Often, like I've seen where people will speak over someone that has
Mm.
speech impairment because they think they know what they might want to actually say. And the part that I always sit there and think is that I don't even know what I'm going to say in 30 seconds' time. So, how would I know what the other person that I'm talking to is going to know? Because even if I think I know what my way of my conversation's going 10 minutes ago, it doesn't mean it is going that way. So I think it's really important, and I think to really acknowledge that it's okay to be awkward within our own awkwardness and
Mm-hmm.
be okay with that and go, well, you know what? That's actually not a bad thing. When we think that there's 4.4 million people in the country with disability, we're going to come across people with disability all the time. Just normalize it. Normalize that it's okay and have those conversations. Also, just acknowledging as a service provider, like focus on the things that you need to focus on in terms of the person's disability. Don't focus on the fact that they have a disability. That's really important because the disability is often not the issue. It's what the person needs in order, because they've got a disability, to be able to access those supports and those services. But just speaking to the person, having those conversations, it's really, really important. And at all costs, try to avoid speaking to anybody other than the person with disability in the first instance, because their responses will ultimately often be different to the person that has disabilities responses. So making sure that you're always communicating with the person with disability first.
It's that whole, like, who's your client? We do this in social work training, who's your client? Be clear about who that is, and so that way you can have their voice central to the work moving forward. Sometimes the parents or the informal caregivers might become louder, but are they your client? Like, and just trying to make sure that we're clear about that.
Regardless of a person's disability, they always have the capacity to be able to understand and communicate and be part of what knowing a healthy relationship is. And I think it's our job to ensure that we're not stopping that from happening.
Get on board, but at least get out of the way. That's kind of sometimes it's like, it's all right. You don't have to be doing all the education and training, but don't stop it from happening.
Yeah.
My final take home from our chat today too is just that reminder that information is actually a safeguarding strategy, and information is also a violence prevention strategy, and just reminding ourselves that teaching about sex and sexuality actually makes us all much safer, not any fear of making us more vulnerable. It actually makes us way less vulnerable because we're able to have the knowledge to know what's okay, what's not okay, to know what's on the menu, so to say, and the ability to know that saying no is well and truly a right. If there's one thing that people take from today's episode, I hope it's that reflection that information education is actually the prevention strategy that we've all been looking for and talking about. And it's not a matter of silence to protect. Silence is actually the problem. Thank you for your time today, and thank you for sharing your work with us. And I hope that your groups continue on. I'm sure they keep you very busy. How many people would you have in a group? That's the other thing I think I'm curious about. How many is the sweet spot?
Yeah, so in general, having no more than 8 people in a group is
Yeah.
great, just because it gives that interaction, and then people feel
Yeah.
safer within that group. So, and there's some groups where it'll be, just female or just male or combination, or also gender diverse within that. That's really dependent on the groups and
Yeah.
what they're actually experiencing, etc. And I think that's really important to acknowledge as well, because I don't want to be putting people into groups that it's going to automatically cause them harm before
Yes,
I
of
even
course.
start. So ensuring that that's the appropriate thing. But yeah, generally 6 to 8 is ideal, because you can
Yep.
really then get conversations. And again, it's not about those direct conversations, because I don't try to do that, because I think those direct conversations should happen outside of a group setting.
Yeah. Yeah, it's not counselling with an audience.
Exactly. It's getting them to think and feel and to be able to respond to the metaphors that are put into place and be able to learn through that process. And then that's why it's so important to have the ongoing supports going forward, because they've then done that and then they need to actually put it to practice with their own life.
Which obviously then needs to include the support worker upskilling and the family member upskilling. Like, we can't
Absolutely.
just educate and teach folk with disability in isolation. Like I was saying, we have to mobilize that whole ecosystem, and that also means educating and training them so it can translate into everyday activities.
Absolutely, I completely agree. And when I say like I separate them, I mean as in like it's good to work with the people with disability, and then good to work with the supports that they might have in their life around it, but ensuring that you're still doing it in a safe way, that you're
Mm,
not actually disclosing the stuff that the person with disability might be disclosing,
of
because
course.
who knows what's going on outside and we
Mm.
don't know. So
Yeah, people with disability have a right to privacy as well.
yeah, so I'm a woman with disability, and like I can almost guarantee I don't talk to my family about my sex life, and I don't need to. Um,
Yeah.
I choose who I will talk to, but I have that
Mm.
right, and that's the difference. Like, I have that opportunity, and I am able to do that. That's the reality, that we should all be able to do that.
If are people wanting to look at referring clients over to your groups, is there a way to do that you want people to be aware of? Or should we just be looking out for disability sex education groups generally? What are your thoughts here? I personally don't think all groups are created equal.
So if people want to be part of a group, they can go to my Sitting Low, Reaching High website. I'm very
Mhm.
much a strong believer that groups shouldn't be just like standard. I like to tailor things around the actual group, because
Mhm.
every group's different, and every like group with disability is different, and every like location people are at are different. And I think that's part of the culture, to ensure that we're meeting that culture. I'd be happy to talk to people around that, and if I can't do it, I can link people to other places that might be able to.
Yeah, cool. Okay. Mel, thank you so much for your time today. And thank you for this opportunity to have this chat around sexual safety and training and sex education. And good luck with the rest of your work this year and all of the many hats that you wear and all the projects that you're juggling. Thanks so much.
Thank you.
A huge thank you to Mel Harrison for her time today, sharing all her wisdom. And if you are interested in following Mel's work, you can find her at Sitting Low, Reaching High. If you've enjoyed today's episode or any of the Really Good Sex Chat episodes, please rate the podcast on Spotify so others can find it too. We look forward to talking to you next time.